So if you've been following along with my videos, you know me primarily as a GFX shooter. But I'm relatively new to the GFX system. This is my X-H1, and this is my true first camera. I did actually buy the X-T2 in 2017, but sold it to buy the X-H1 when it came out, something about IBIS and all of that, but I digress. I have about 6 years in the XF game, and I wanted to share with you all the lenses that make up my kit. I'm going to briefly talk about each lens and share with you the pros and cons and any surprises I encountered. And of course, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite images shot on each lens as well. First up, we have the 50 to 140 millimeter lens. It is a 70 to 200 millimeter equivalent, is an f2.8 to f22, has a 72 millimeter filter thread size. It weighs in at 2.19 pounds or 995 grams, has a minimum focal distance at 3.28 feet or 1 meter, and has an MSRP of $1,600. This lens has one switch to turn IBIS on or off, and is also a red badge lens, one of the zoom trinities. It also has an option to have a foot attached to the bottom of it, but I took that off. Before Fuji, I would borrow my friend's Canon, and he had a 70 to 200 2.8, and I absolutely loved that lens, so this lens was a natural pickup for me. The good about this lens, well, the bokeh is absolutely insane. I love the 200 millimeter focal length. You can expect some awesome bokeh from this lens. And of course, it is a zoom, so it's a bit versatile in that aspect. As for what's bad about this lens, I don't have anything bad to say about this lens. Maybe you could complain it's a little bit heavy, but it is a 70 to 200, so I'm not sure what else you would expect. As for surprises that I ran into with this lens, didn't run into any. What is this lens good for? Pretty much anything you want to throw at it. It's great in the studio. It has fast autofocus, so it's great for fast moving subjects. It's great for street photography. I'm not the biggest fan of using this lens in low light, as it's a 2.8 and on the crop sensor it seems to be a bit darker. This is a great portrait lens. Pretty much anything you want to throw at it, I could see this lens being great for. As for to buy or not, 100% buy in my opinion. And as for my rating, I would give this lens a 10 out of 10. And up next, we have the 23mm 1.4. This is the Gen 1 version. This is an equivalent 35mm focal length, has an aperture of 1.4 to f16, has a 62mm thread size, has a weight of 0.66 pounds or 300 grams, has a minimum focal distance of 24 inches or 61 centimeters, and the MSRP came in at about $900. I purchased this lens back in 2017. This was the first lens that I purchased for the FX system. I did it because I wanted a standard focal length. There are those who are in camp 50mm. I am in camp 35mm for the standard focal length, so that's why I picked this up. I also picked it up for the 1.4 aperture for low light, and of course, nice bokeh. And starting with the good qualities of this lens, the bokeh is indeed really nice. And of course, it is really good in low light, being an f1.4. But moving into the bad, this is not the sharpest lens in the FX toolbox, and the autofocus is kind of horrible. If you are shooting something that is moving faster than a slow speed, I would not recommend this lens, either for photography or video. The surprises that I encountered with this lens would be the horrible autofocus. I did not expect that when buying this lens. I would say that this lens is good for street photography, can be great for studio photography, anything kind of low light, being an f1.4. Whether I would recommend this lens or not, I'm kind of mixed. It does have this really cool clutch feature that you could pull back and now you're shooting manual focus. And then if you want to shoot automatic, you just pop it back into place. Not a feature to buy the lens for, but it is pretty cool. I have used it many times. If you're gonna take this lens and go out on a sunny day and do street photography, you're gonna have some nice bokeh in the shots if you're shooting close to wide open. However, it's just, you're not gonna end up with the sharpest images. Zooming in Lightroom, the images are just not gonna be hyper sharp, especially if you're going to 100% or beyond. You can't really zoom in that far with this lens. It's just not the sharpest lens. And the autofocus is exceptionally bad. I want to use this lens for all of my videos for YouTube. However, it's just, the focus is really bad, especially if I'm using the X-H1. I'm gonna honestly not recommend this lens. Just go for the newer models. Even if there's a killer sale on this, I'd recommend going with the newer model. And to rate this lens, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10, the lowest score in the kit. All the points basically docked for sharpness and autofocus. This is the XF 8 to 16 millimeter 2.8 lens. This is a 12 to 24 millimeter equivalent. The aperture is a 2.8 to f/22. It doesn't really have a threadable filter option. It weighs in at about 1.8 pounds or 805 grams. The minimum focal distance is 9.84 inches or 25 centimeters, and the MSRP is $2,000. It's also a red badge lens, part of the FujiFilm Trinity. Why did I pick this lens up? Well, I needed the wide lens, and I wasn't a big fan of the FX 10 to 24 millimeter f4. So this was a good option for me. The good about this lens, well, it handles distortion exceptionally well, even at 8 millimeters. I think with wide lenses, it's all about getting the angle right. So if your angle is completely off from the start, don't expect to correct it in post. But if you nail that angle, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the distortion on this lens. It handles it exceptionally well, way better than the new GF wide lens. This is also an exceptionally sharp lens. Not as sharp as the FX80 macro, but it is a very sharp lens. The autofocus is also very fast. As for the bad, well, there's only really one big thing, and it is the big bubble front of the lens. As you can see, it has a built-in hood, and there is no part to screw in a filter. To put an ND filter or a polarizer or anything along those lines, you basically have to get a filter attachment that goes on the outside of the ring, add on some really big filters, and it's exceptionally expensive, and to be honest, I never did it for this lens. So that would be my worst thing about this lens. As for surprises for this lens, nothing really surprised me, as to be expected. What is this lens good for? I found this lens to be good at anything you can throw at it. It's exceptional in studio photography. I would shoot things on the 16 millimeter end, but super sharp, great in studio lighting. It's also amazing for street photography. So when I do street photography, typically I will bring this lens and the 50 to 140, nothing else. Personally, 23 megapixels is not enough for me anymore. I've since moved to the GFX. I really would not be ever attaching filters to this lens. I do all my long exposure and HDR on the GFX. If I had purchased the XH2 instead of going with the GFX, I could potentially see getting a filter setup for this, but again, it's just a lot of money for a filter setup for this lens, and I don't really think it's worth it. So if you need a filter setup, I wouldn't probably recommend this lens, but if you don't need a filter setup, 100% recommend this lens, especially over the 10 to 24 millimeter. I would definitely buy it. As for my rating, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. It doesn't land the perfect 10 out of 10 because of the filter system issue, but it's a phenomenal lens and I'd definitely recommend it. So jumping in real quick, if you are appreciating the information in this video and would love to continue to see more reviews and more pixel peeping and more information on Fujifilm gear, please consider subscribing. It would help me out a ton. And back to the video. Next, we have the 80mm 2.8. It is a 120mm equivalent, has a minimum aperture of f2.8 up to f22, has a 62mm thread size. It weighs in at about 1.65 pounds or 750 grams, and its minimum focal distance is a 9.84 inches or 25 centimeters, and the MSRP is $1,200. This lens also has switches for both limiter as well as turning the IBIS on or off on the lens directly. So initially, I bought this lens for two reasons. The first being I wanted to really test out a macro lens, and the second being I wanted this to be my primary studio lens. And jumping into the good qualities of this lens, this is an insanely sharp lens. Probably the sharpest lens on the FX system, bold statement, but it is sharp. This lens also has really killer bokeh and of course a very short minimum focal distance. This lens isn't that heavy and the autofocus is pretty fast. And jumping into the bad, I don't really have anything bad to say about this lens. I think if you don't like cat eye style bokeh, maybe that could be something you could bring up here, but otherwise I really don't have anything bad to say. As for any surprises, I don't really have any. This lens exceeded all expectations. It's a phenomenal lens. And for what it's good at, I found that it's good for everything, whether you're shooting products in the studio or macro, bugs, plants, anything, street photography. This lens is a pretty solid lens. And whether or not you should buy this lens, 100%, no questions asked, it is a phenomenal lens. If you can utilize the 120mm focal length, I definitely recommend picking this up. As for the rating, 10 out of 10, perfect lens. This is just optical perfection. So we wrapped up the lenses, but as a bonus, here is the 2x teleconverter. What this does is it increases your focal length and magnification by 2x, but you do lose 2 stops of light. This weighs in at 6 ounces or 170 grams, and the MSRP is $450. So why would you get this? Well, you want to double your focal length, but it only works for certain lenses. So it works for the 150 to 600, the 100 to 400, the 50 to 140, the 70 to 300, and the 80 millimeter macro. On to the bad. The first thing on the list is that we lose 2 stops of light. The second thing is that we have to double the aperture. So if you have a lens like the 50 to 140 that has great bokeh, you're shooting at 200 millimeters, wide open at 2.8, and you pop this on, you're gonna get that 400 millimeter focal. However, you're gonna have to double the aperture to 5.6, which honestly, it makes a big difference in the quality. The other thing to consider is that if we're shooting fast moving subjects with the 50 to 140, this on it, shooting at 400, well, even if it's a really bright day, you're probably gonna have to crank the ISO because you're gonna be shooting at the fastest shutter your camera has, but you're losing 2 stops of light and your aperture is double. So this is kind of a tricky thing to use and it's not really magic. So this is basically a magnification. It's kind of expensive because as you can see, it has glass elements in it. That's what boosts the price up. But the biggest negative thing for me is the IQ drop. You get a pretty substantial IQ drop, so much so that I never really used this thing. I kind of regret the purchase. And to be honest, I don't know why I didn't sell it at this point. If you've been watching my other videos, you know that I'm pretty heavy into pixel peeping and taking a look at the fine details of each photo. And when you're doing that with this, it doesn't give you the best results. And for that reason, I would definitely not recommend this. It does work well with the macro lens sometimes. It really depends on the shot and how all the elements line up. But ultimately, in terms of a rating, I would give this a 3 out of 10. I would recommend putting your money towards a new lens that will get you the focal length that you need. In terms of what future FX equipment I'm gonna pick up, the first thing on my list is the XH2S. I am using that camera currently to record this video. Fuji was cool enough to send it to me along with the 18mm 1.4. That is the lens on the camera right now. And I'm really impressed with the autofocus. So that is first on my list. And I kind of want to see how my other lenses perform. I just got this camera, so this is really my first test drive. So I don't really know if I plan to pick up the 18 1.4 or maybe try out other lenses. I'm unsure about that, but I'm definitely gonna pick up the body. What is in your FX kit? Did you agree with any of the lenses or all the lenses that I have in my kit? What would you change and what would you recommend? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to have a discussion. With that being said, if you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing. It would help me out a ton, and hit that thumbs up button. I'm gonna have some videos coming out on the XH2S as well as this 18mm 1.4. So subscribe, get updated, stay tuned for that. And with that being said, I'll catch you in the next video.